Good morning. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom Mackenzie at the Founders Forum in Oxfordshire. These are the stories that set your agenda. US futures and the dollar slide as President Trump threatens universal tariffs within the next 2 weeks. Back of the line, US Commerce Secretary warns the EU is likely to be among the last to secure a trade deal with America as he blames slow progress in negotiations. Plus, the US orders some embassy staff to leave Baghdad after Iran warns of retaliation in the region if it comes under attack. Good morning from the Founders Forum in Oxfordshire. For 20 years, this has been the gathering, connecting tech founders with investors, CEOs and government officials. Today, some 450 entrepreneurs are in attendance, including 200 whose companies became unicorns, valued at over $1 billion. This year alone, European startups have raised more than 60 billion euros in funding. And globally, it's tech, of course, that draws in the most cash, securing more than $150 billion in investments so far in 2025 alone. We have got some great exclusive interviews coming up on the show, including with the CEOs of Wayve and Synthesia. But first, let's take a closer look at the market reaction to Trump's tariff comments. Avril Hong standing by in Singapore. Avril.
Yeah, Tom, the calm that we experienced in the market in the past week or so following the Trump call and then U.S.-Chinese officials voicing optimism about the tariff truce, all that didn't last very long. Trump's unilateral tariff comment prompting this re-emergence of trade uncertainties in the markets for investors. So we're seeing the VIX futures spiking to the highest level in about a week. U.S. stock futures also lower. Treasuries catching a bit. Part of this to do with the U.S. CPI print. But flip the board, take a look as well at some of the other havens that have been catching a bit today. They include the Japanese yen that's climbed to the strongest level against the greenback in about a week, and it's among the top gainers in the G10s against the US dollar. The dollar slide is also helping some of these other Asia currencies in the region, including the renminbi, and it's also being propped up in a way by the PBOC, setting a slightly stronger fix for yet another session, suggesting that the Chinese central bank is trying to steadily guide the Chinese currency stronger. But we also had the likes of BNP Paribas highlighting that the yuan appreciation could be limited if these tariff levels remain unchanged. So certainly that specter of the tariff concerns for FX as well. Let's for the board take a look at the risk off in the region. We're seeing the Hang Seng reversing yesterday's gains. That's despite some signs of Chinese property sector recovery. The Nikkei is leading declines in the region along with the TAIEX. For the Nikkei, this is not helped along by the yen strength, but note as well how it is snapping a 4-session winning streak. Suddenly that idea of profit taking amid the uncertainties, U.S. policy volatility really not helping markets today. Tom.
OK, risk off across these equity markets. Dollar down once again. Avril Hong in Singapore, thank you. Let's get more details then on the changing trade dynamics. So what we've been hearing, of course, from the US President Donald Trump saying that he intended to send letters to trading partners in the next 1 to 2 weeks, setting unilateral tariff rates ahead of a July the 9th deadline to reimpose higher duties on dozens of economies. Trump spoke to reporters in Washington.
Well, we're dealing with Japan, we're dealing with South Korea, we're dealing with a lot of them. We're dealing with about 15 countries, but as you know, we have about 150 plus, and you can't do that. So we're going to be sending letters out in about a week and a half, 2 weeks, to countries, telling them what the deal is, like I did with EU.
Well, joining me now for the details and the context is Bloomberg's Katia Dimitreva, who's been following all of this for us. Katia, what should we read into these latest comments from the US President? The fact that he's sending out these letters, is he sticking to this July the 9th deadline? Are we looking at tariffs going up once again?
These are all very good questions that I think everyone is asking. And, you know, the reality is that we've been here before. This is exactly what we were hearing about 3 weeks ago when President Trump said that in 2 to 3 weeks he would be sending these letters out to a variety of countries because, you know, after all, he does have to negotiate. Originally, the plan was to negotiate with over 100 countries. which the team just simply does not have the ability to do. It's incredibly complex, these trade negotiations. And so what we can kind of read into it is what we've known for some time, which is that there's about 24 countries that the U.S. is focused on strategically for kind of bilateral specific deals that are currently in negotiation, from China to the EU to South Korea, Japan. And then for everyone else, it'll probably just be a flat rate. We don't know what that rate will look like. It will probably be lower than what we've seen, given all the activity with countries promising to buy things like Boeing aircraft and agricultural goods. And of course, we have some timeline, right? The Trump administration said that the EU, for example, will probably be the last deal to get done because of some sticking points there. And we had China tentatively recently, as well as the UK deal. So there's sort of a lineup of countries here. But as for timeline, you know, your guess is probably as good as mine.
OK, no, that's absolutely fair, Katya. And in terms of the negotiations, of course, that we saw take place in London between the US and China, Trump coming out and saying, look, the China deal is completed. The China deal is done. Has China confirmed that? Have we heard similar things from the Chinese side?
Yeah, we're hearing very different tones from both the U.S. and China. This is kind of similar to what happened after Geneva as well. You had the U.S. Having this press conference immediately with media, taking lots of questions with a more optimistic tone, and China not doing the same. So we did hear from the chief negotiator in a statement. It was from state media saying that the U.S. and China were both going to work towards upholding the agreement that was made by phone between Xi and President Trump. But there's really no details yet. We don't have a readout of what that trade agreement looks like. We don't have numbers in front of us. What we do know is essentially we're back to where we were just about a month ago, with China promising to go back to a normal flow of rare earths. And we have the U.S. saying that they're going to be more open with Chinese students. So kind of still very vague. And really just until we get that agreement, it's hard to say how far we're going to get.
OK, Bloomberg's Katya Dimitrieva with a great wrap of what we've been hearing from the US president, and a little bit less from the Chinese side as we await, of course, more details. Now, on further geopolitical news, the US has ordered some embassy staff to depart Baghdad and authorise military service members' families to leave the Middle East. That's after Iran threatened to attack US bases in the region if talks over its nuclear programme fall through. Oil edging lower after a 4% jump yesterday. Patrick Sykes is Bloomberg's Middle East breaking news editor. He joins me now from Istanbul. Patrick, thank you for your time. How serious is this move by the US? Does it suggest we are now closer, at least the US, possibly Israel as well, closer to a confrontation with Iran?
Morning, Tom. You mentioned Israel there, and I think the most serious part of those developments was the parallel report by CBS overnight that Israel is ready to launch an operation in Iran. On the one hand, that's obviously something they've been preparing for a long time, but readiness kind of underlines it again, I think. In that scenario, Iran has said that it would attack US bases in the region, and we have to assume that that's the reason that the US has taken this decision, though they haven't publicly said so. As for direct confrontation, I think no, not necessarily. Iran and its proxies around the region have attacked US bases before. Previously, what we've seen after those attacks has been moves to de-escalate, either by not retaliating or a moderated retaliation. But there's a lot of variables there. It would depend on the nature of any Israeli attack, in turn, the nature of the Iranian or allied Iranian attack on a US base. And then behind all of that, you've got the unpredictable Trump factor. So not necessarily, but I think there's still a lot of variables at play.
Yeah, and on that unpredictable Trump factor, we know, of course, there have been talks between the US and Iran in recent weeks on the question of their nuclear program. Are those talks now dead in the water? Is there any prospect of movement forward in terms of the diplomacy?
Iran this week said no, they're not dead in the water, but I think it is fair to say the rhetoric from both sides has turned more negative in the past sort of week and a half. The sticking point that it comes down to is uranium enrichment, basically. The US is saying that it won't allow Iran to have any enrichment capacity under the terms of a deal. Iran is saying that's a red line. This is prized scientific knowledge and capability, and they're not prepared to give it all up. They need to keep some. And it's hard to see as of now how they square that circle. I think a deal or no deal is going to depend on whether they can either find some creative way to do so, or they can have some kind of fudge that kicks that can down the road. But for now, there is still the next round of talks scheduled for Sunday in Oman. That, we have to assume, suggests that both sides think there is still something worth talking about, but I think it will be a pivotal round.
Okay, a pivotal round of talks on Sunday in Oman. We look ahead to those. Bloomberg's Patrick Sykes as tensions rise once again in the region. So President Trump's latest tariff comments and those geopolitical tensions in the Middle East are having an impact on the markets. You just need to look to the dollar and oil. Let's bring in Bloomberg's Valerie Teitel now for the market reaction. Val, talk us through where the sensitivity is being felt in these markets right now on both tariffs and geopolitics.
Yeah, well, we can say that the broad market is really feeling the heat from this recent threat of tariffs from President Donald Trump. We are trading lower in S&P 500 futures in the Asia session, down some 0.3%. But as you mentioned, U.S. dollar down another 0.3%. Tom, we are hovering at year-to-date lows for the U.S. dollar spot index. It's lowest in nearly 2 years. So we continue to see dollar weakness whenever we get bad news on trade. So keep an eye on that. Gold is also rising. We're still around 2% away from record highs, but notable, we are ticking up at least 0.5% in gold this morning. And those treasury yields are again lower, traditionally moving lower in a risk off sense. They're holding on to yesterday's rally after that soft CPI. So 440 is where we trade on the U.S. 10-year yield. Let's check in on oil, though, because yesterday it did hit a 2-month high for Brent on the back of these Middle East tensions. We are paring back from those levels now. So over the last 2 sessions, we're just up shy of 4%. Basically, the risk-off moves around Trump tariffs denting the oil price rise of yesterday.
And Val, we also were hearing from the US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. He's been a busy man, hasn't he, in recent days? And he's been testifying in the House yesterday. He wouldn't be drawn, though, on whether the tax legislation the Republicans are working on to finalise in Congress will avoid adding to the debt burden. He blamed Democrats for the deficit. Let's take a listen.
What I believe is that everyone on the Democratic side voted for the biggest blowout for the deficit in history, and that we are suffering from that. This past tax year, we will have between a 6.5 and 6.7% deficit, so I find it very difficult to be lectured to by people who created the largest deficit in history when we were not at war and not in a recession.
Val, what does the Treasury Secretary's comments about the deficit do in terms of that market anxiety about the blowout of US debt, particularly if this bill on tax and spending is finalised and passed, as it works its way through the Senate right now?
Yeah, pretty heated response there from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, saying he isn't to blame for this current deficit. It's the last administration. But he did reiterate, Tom, that his wish by the end of Trump's term in 2029 that he'll have a deficit to GDP ratio shy of 4%. So he did reiterate that he does want to bring the deficit down. And it's not his fault that the current run rate for this year's budget deficit is historically wide for a peacetime scenario. It's putting maybe the Treasury market on a better footing this morning. That reminder from him that he wants to get that deficit under control. We also had some data out from the U.S. federal budget balance for the month of May. It was a bit better than expected. So we're seeing that U.S. budget deficit at a 6.7% level right now. It was 17% lower than last May's spending. So maybe that's adding some ease into the Treasury market this morning. We do have that very important 30-year auction at 6 p.m. London time, and definitely government spending is at the forefront of investors' mind.
OK, Bloomberg's Valerie Teitel, thank you very much indeed. Here's what else to think about then as we close in on the rest of the day. 7 a.m. UK time in about 45 minutes time. We're going to get the UK monthly GDP print as well, so we'll get another gauge on the health of the UK economy. Of course, we had the spending review and plans around capital expenditures outlined by the Chancellor yesterday. At 1:30 p.m. UK time, we will get the US producer prices after, of course, consumer prices came in below estimates. We'll also get initial jobless claims, so further rounding out the picture in terms of the labour market in the US. And 6 p.m. UK time, this is the one that Valerie Teitel has got her eye on. It is that $22 billion 30-year bond auction. So another test in terms of the appetite for the long end of the curve when it comes to those US Treasuries. We will be marking that for you. You can get a roundup of the stories you need to know to get your day going in today's edition of Daybreak. Terminal subscribers can go to DAYB Go. Coming up, a second night of curfew in Los Angeles. We're going to have the latest on the protests over those immigration raids. And a little later in the programme, I'll be speaking exclusively to the CEO of self-driving tech firm Wayve about its partnership with Uber to trial robo-taxis in London. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Happy Thursday, everyone. Live from the Founders Forum here in Oxfordshire, where tech founders and investors have been brought together for 20 years. And throughout the day, we will be speaking to some of the trailblazers here today. Much more coming up soon. But first, to a story we continue, of course, to monitor very closely. Parts of downtown Los Angeles are currently under a second night of curfew as the Trump administration escalates its crackdown on protests over immigration raids. Charlie Wells is here with an update. Charlie, what is the current state then of these protests in LA and nationally now as well?
Well, Tom, Los Angeles really remains the epicenter of a lot of these protests. There have been some 600 arrests in Los Angeles since the weekend. And a lot of the residents that I've been speaking with over the past few days have talked about this eerie sense of calm. So these protests are limited to a small part of the city, as is the curfew. But there's this eerie sense of calm and of viewing a lot of these pictures of active duty military personnel on the second largest city in the United States. But these protests are spreading. They're spreading to major cities across the United States, to Chicago, to New York. And when you look at a lot of the conditions here, you can see why there is the potential for tensions to ramp up. There are 11 million undocumented people in the United States. That is more than the population of Switzerland, of Greece, or of Israel. And you combine that with the fact that there are ICE raids that have been ramping up. Local officials in Los Angeles alone have been talking about how these raids are going to continue daily. So there are tensions here, and you can see why there is the potential for the spread of these protests across the United States.
Well, given the spread and given the tensions, Charlie, is this Trump administration doubling down at this point or starting to walk back some of these measures?
Well, Tom, they are doubling down, and they're doubling down in the way of kind of trying to bring out new federal powers that we tend not to see on either the left or the right. So we've heard about this deployment of active duty military personnel in Los Angeles. A spokesperson for the Pentagon yesterday talked about how there are currently more troops in Los Angeles than there are serving in Syria or Iraq right now. So you've seen that on the troop front, but you've also seen this on, some of these issues related to kind of federal power and law enforcement. So the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, talking yesterday about invoking the Hobbs Act, which would allow federal prosecutors to take over criminal cases that would normally be handled on the state level.
Charlie Wells, thank you very much indeed with the update in terms of those protests in Los Angeles, the second night of curfew, and those protests, of course, spreading as well to other cities in the US. Coming up, we're going to switch focus. The Czech president calls on the US to give Europe more time to rearm, to contain Russian aggression. More from our exclusive interview next. That's coming up. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, live from the Founders Forum in Oxfordshire. We've got exclusive conversations coming up with some of the pioneering CEOs here today, so stay tuned for those conversations. But first, Czech Republic President Petr Pavel says he believes his country will adopt the euro, but it will take some time. He spoke exclusively to Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta.
This debate has become truly emotional and irrational. My simple argument to our population is that we are dependent on Eurozone, if you like it or not. Most of our trade is with Eurozone, and in that sense, it doesn't make too much sense when the Eurozone discusses future steps and rules, and we are behind the door. And the sentiments are mostly negative because people were told by a number of politicians that by adopting euro they will become poorer and everything will be more expensive and we will have no freedom and autonomy to adjust the courses. But in reality, the room for adjusting courses with our own currency is so narrow that it really doesn't make too much benefit. So sooner or later, I believe that rational reasons will bring us to the adoption of euro, but it will take some time.
OK, the Czech president also called on the US to give Europe more time and realistic goals to take care of the continent's security and contain an increasingly aggressive Russia. Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta joins me now after that conversation, of course. Kriti, Pavel, believing that European nations can't secure a lasting peace in Ukraine without American help. He wants that American backstop to remain in place, at least in the medium term, it seems.
He does, and this is some interesting comments coming not only from the Czech president, but he, of course, in a former life was also the first in command over at NATO. So he's had a first-hand look in terms of the operations that NATO can provide. I asked him that question, and that the interim, while you're having this defense spending ramp up, Mark Rutte, for example, talking about getting to that 5% level, 3.5% of GDP in terms of spend in the near term, that's a process that could take years, something that the Czech president admitted himself. So what do you do in the interim? And that's where he was talking about the security guarantees from the United States, that if Donald Trump were, as reports suggest, to come to The Hague for that NATO summit, at the end of the day, he needs to give a little bit more grace, a little bit more slack to the European Union's leaders to be able to take command, basically, and take more of that responsibility. But it's not a process that can happen in the span of weeks or months, which is, of course, the time frame that we're looking at in terms of a potential peaceful solution in Ukraine. This is a process that could take years. In the meantime, Tom, the Czech president as well, also leading an initiative to get ammunition from various countries to Ukraine, because so far we've been talking about defense ramp up in terms of tanks, in terms of machinery, in terms of missiles, but the actual ammunition itself, the shells that go on the front lines, that's something that the Czech president has been coordinating in terms of finding those supplies from various nations and being able to again supply it to Ukraine through the Czech Republic. And that's a key piece of the defense conversation we don't often talk about.
OK, Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta with that conversation, of course, with the leader of the Czech Republic. Thank you very much indeed. Coming up, Hoxton Ventures founder Hussein Kanji joins us. We're going to discuss why he's more bullish on European tech now than ever. That conversation is next. This is Bloomberg. Good morning. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom Mackenzie at the Founders Forum in Oxfordshire. These are the stories that set your agenda. US futures and the dollar slide as President Trump threatens universal tariffs within the next 2 weeks. Back of the line, the US Commerce Secretary warns the EU is likely to be among the last to secure a trade deal with America as he blames slow progress in negotiations. Plus, the US orders some embassy staff to leave Baghdad after Iran warns of retaliation in the region if it comes under attack. Let's get an update then on the markets from Bloomberg's Valerie Teitel. Risk off, it seems, Val, with the dollar under pressure again.
Risk off, we have the dollar under pressure, hovering around year-to-date lows. And take a look at euro-dollar, trading on a 115 handle for the first time in over a month. But those S&P futures have been knocked lower by this recent threat from Donald Trump on tariffs. We're trading around 0.3% lower on U.S. futures. Gold is also given a bid up around 0.6%, trading just 2% shy of record highs. That's that risk-off safe haven bid into the yellow metal. We have those U.S. 10-year yields holding on to their rally of yesterday after that soft CPI print. 440 is where we trade on the U.S. 10-year yield. Let's take a check on oil, though. Very interesting price action here. We had one of the best days for Brent crude in a few months' time, surging 4.3%. Has recently been knocked off of that 2-month high, though, around this risk-off move. So in the last 2 days, we're now less than 4% higher on Brent crude. But while we're on the subject of tariffs, I do want to note about the CPI print yesterday is really starting to doubt this tariff pass-through into some key components. Take a look at this. These are the components that the economists were most worried about to show some tariff-induced inflation. All of them printed in deflation yesterday, whether it was vehicles, apparel, telephone hardware, that's smartphones, or furniture, all in negative territory in yesterday's CPI print, really giving economists something to think about.
OK, Bloomberg's Valet Total with a touch on the markets and unpacking some of that inflation data as well as we look ahead to producer prices out of the US later today. We are here at Founders Forum, though, now, which is marking its 20th anniversary. 2 decades. This year, Bloomberg and Founders Forum have combined forces to highlight the European companies and the founders aiming to have an impact on a global scale. Our list of 25 startups to watch spotlights the inventors and builders making bold bets across fields from drones to healthcare to generative AI. Among them is the AI avatar platform Synthesia, founded in 2016. It now boasts over 1 million users. I'll be speaking to the CEO, Victor Rippabelli, at 9:45 London time. The autonomous vehicle startup Wayve is also on the list. It has backers including SoftBank, Nvidia, and Microsoft. The CEO, Alex Kendall, joins me later this hour for an exclusive conversation in just under 8 minutes' time or so at 6:40 a.m. London time. Now, Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang has predicted that Europe's AI computing capacity will increase tenfold over the next 2 years, with more than 20 so-called AI factories in the works. Nvidia is planning to build the world's first industrial AI cloud for European manufacturers in Germany. Huang announced the plans at GTC Paris, held alongside European tech events VivaTech.
This industrial cloud will be used for design and simulation, virtual wind tunnels that you just walk into, virtual wind tunnels you just move a car into and you see it behave, all completely in real time. Design in real time, simulate in a digital wind tunnel, digital twin of a wind tunnel in real time, build it in a factory of a digital factory, digital twin in real time, all of this, and let robots learn how to be great robots and build the robots of our future.
And as UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer attempts to woo more tech into Britain, he will be keen, of course, to attract more unicorns. And unicorn status is a goal for Hoxton Ventures as well. It has backed about 40 startups, including cybersecurity startup Darktrace and food delivery startup Deliveroo, and has around $370 million in assets under management. Let's speak to the founder of Hoxton Ventures, Hussein Kanji, who joins us from Paris. Hussein, thank you so much for joining us this morning. You've talked about, we heard there from Jensen Huang, he's talked about the infrastructure needs of Europe, the infrastructure needs of the UK to ensure we are not left behind when it comes to this AI revolution. You say you are more bullish on European tech now than you have been previously. Why?
100%. I mean, what we've seen over the last 10 years as a fund is that the scale of capacity here in Europe has only gone up kind of tenfold in the market. You know, on a per capita basis, and this is not very cited in the press, Europe has more engineers, about 30% more engineers in AI than the US does, about 3 times as many engineers than China does. Doesn't make a difference, it doesn't make a surprise because of the size of the Chinese population. And some of the most interesting companies, you just profiled a couple of them, Synthesia, Wayve, 11 Labs, you know, the list goes on, Darktrace, et cetera, have come out of here. And almost every major big tech company now has an engineering presence, specifically an AI presence, whether it's Google and DeepMind in London or it's Meta in Paris with their FAIR lab, which is their AI lab. or it's Apple with the lab in Zurich. So there is a ton of technical talent, and it is only a matter of time before technical talent kind of finds its way into the market and ends up building the next generation of companies.
So we have that technical talent, we have that gap in terms of the spread, in fact, of engineers versus our counterparts in the US. What happens in terms of the geopolitics, given what we're seeing in terms of some of the changes of policy domestically in the US, whether it's the crackdown on immigration or taking a much harder line, the crackdown on universities in terms of scientific and engineering talent in the US? Is this potentially an opening for Europe as well to attract that talent and to build out innovations that maybe will not be as positively received stateside at this point?
This might be Europe's opportunity and Europe's golden moment, right? Where, post World War II, America was able to capitalize on a lot of the intellectual talent in the world and kind of bring it home into the US. And it led to a wave of series of innovations in the space race, in the computing age, in semiconductors. A ton of this stuff is actually built by immigrants. If you look at OpenAI, 3 of their early engineers, one came from Poland, one came from Slovakia, one came from the Czech Republic, or one came from the Netherlands. Sorry, not the Czech Republic. It is. You have to be a magnet for talent. It is disappointing to me that the policymakers in Europe are not figuring out that this is actually a really good opportunity for Europe to pull in some of the best and the brightest around the world, including some of originally their own, back into the country. The other problem that's actually not very well talked about in Europe is there is not enough risk-seeking capital. I mean, there are funds like us, there are funds like Sequoia and Lightspeed that have kind of come across the pond and General Catalyst, but there is not enough capital. The U.S. has invested something on the order of 7 to 9 times as much capital in generative AI as Europe has over the last few years. We are just not competitive as an economy, not because we don't have the cash, but we just don't have the risk-taking appetite that folks in the U.S. do. So from a policy perspective, the 2 things I would kind of make an appeal to the policymakers are get some of this talent into the country, like the anti-immigration rhetoric that is just as rampant here in Europe and in the UK really needs to be shut down on these kinds of things. We should be a magnet for global talent, and we've got to step up our ability to actually take risks, particularly on writing early stage checks into these companies and kind of funding them to actually build them up into big companies.
So the capital is there, but that risk appetite needs to be adjusted, because that is part of the reason, isn't it, why we have that talent. As you say, we are able to found and build these companies, but the key question is how do we keep them here? We name-checked a couple of your portfolio companies, Deliveroo and Darktrace. We had the takeover, of course, of Deliveroo by the US ride-hailing delivery company DoorDash, and then, of course, Darktrace taken over by Thoma Bravo, the private equity firm. How do we keep the talent, and how do we keep the startups and the founders and the innovations that we built it in Europe?
So I'm not so sure you need to necessarily keep things in the country. I'm a big believer in trade. I mean, I think there's a ton of growth that happens when countries actually trade with each other. The fact that I often point is, way back in 1995, in the Israeli economy, 6% of its GDP was high tech. Today, 21% of its economy is high tech, and GDP has tripled in that time period. I think there's a lot to be said in actually building these innovations and then partnering with other countries and actually rolling these out into other countries. Darktrace did a fabulous job at doing this in terms of expanding into the US market from the earliest days. There's something like a 2.5 times order of magnitude difference if you're able to do that and actually expand into a big country like the US. I'm really pleased to see Alex at Wayve is doing exactly the same thing with his partnership with Wayve with Uber. I think this is a place where I think you can build these things. I think you got to figure out how to fund these things, but I think you then want to trade with the rest of the world and export these things. And, software doesn't have friction, right? Unlike manufacturing, and it's very easy to put one of these models or one of these products or one of these apps, onto a global app store and kind of distribute it all over the world, and people will use it. And I think that's the lens at which we have to think about the world. But it is weirdly enough a contrarian lens today in this day and age, where the rhetoric is far more nationalistic and far more jingoistic. And it's disappointing, because I think this is actually how you stimulate economic growth for both sides of the pond.
And Hussein, on the funding piece, given the elongated timeframes now between founding and exits, how is that changing the way that you and the team at Hoxton invest?
I'm not actually so sure it's actually that elongated. We wrote the first check into Darktrace as an institution in their very first institutional round. 8 years later, we were able to take it public, and we were able to distribute a ton of cash back to our investors. Venture funds operate on kind of 10 to 12-year timeframes. And if you look at a lot of things that are happening in AI, there's never been more acceleration in revenue. If you look at something like Lovable or 11 Labs, these are the next wave of kind of AI companies. They've gone from 0 to 100 million in revenue, or on the path to 100 million in revenue in the case of Lovable, in a very, very short period of time.
Okay, Hussein Kanji, founder of Hoxton Ventures. Thank you so much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it. Your insights in terms of what is needed to continue to grow the tech and innovation space in Europe. Some of the portfolio companies, including, of course, Darktrace Deliveroo, with around $370 million in AUM. Coming up, I'm going to be speaking exclusively to the co-founder and CEO of self-driving tech firm Wayve, days after it announced a tie-up with Uber to trial robo-taxis in London. That's coming up. This is Bloomberg.
Tech is integrated into every aspect of our lives, from finance to defense, AI to entertainment, and from the road to the stars. Bloomberg brings you the latest stories from the people and companies pushing the tech sector to new frontiers and the politics that shape global tech markets. I'm Tom Mackenzie in London. Watch the new Bloomberg Tech Europe. Premieres June 13th, only on Bloomberg Television.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, live from the Founders Forum in Oxfordshire. Earlier this week, the driverless vehicle startup Wayve announced its first project with Uber to trial fully autonomous vehicles in London. The companies have been working together for some time, with Uber owning a strategic investment in the London-based startup. And the co-founder and CEO of Wayve, Alex Kendall, is with me now for an exclusive conversation. Alex, you are backed by Nvidia, SoftBank, Microsoft. You are making progress after progress. You're achieving your goals, it seems. And now the partnership with Uber for the trial of these robotaxis, potentially in the spring of next year, is what we understand. How significant is this partnership for you and the team?
Well, it's great to be back with you, Tom. We can't let Shanghai and San Francisco have all the fun. I think Londoners are going to really embrace autonomous vehicles and a robotaxi offering. There's such a rich diversity of different mobility offerings in London, and I think bringing the benefits of autonomy here is so exciting. We've been working on Wayve for about 8 years now, and the opportunity to now bring autonomous robotaxis to a market like London, which I think is one of Uber's 5 biggest markets, it's a dream for us. So I'm really excited for this opportunity.
And how deep do you see that partnership with Uber going? What is the potential of that partnership longer term?
Well, the other exciting thing we announced this week is that we've just driven in over 90 cities in the last 90 days. And I think, for me, that really demonstrates just the sheer scale that our approach can operate at. We've taken a fresh approach to autonomous driving that's different from what we've seen before in places like China and in the United States. What we do is we learn to drive with end-to-end AI. We bring an onboard intelligence that has the capability to drive through things it might never have seen before during training. And that's what we just showed. Driving in over 90 cities around the world across Europe, Asia, North America, just demonstrates the sheer scale that we can operate, and Uber see us as a partner that can really deliver them a global solution to autonomous mobility.
And your belief and your aspiration is that that platform, that technology, allows you essentially to leapfrog your competitors at pace and at scale that companies using LiDAR and cameras cannot.
Well, our robotaxis will likely still have, they will have redundant sensing, camera, radar, LiDAR. But the key thing is it's not a retrofit. So we don't take production vehicles and put these sensing and compute architectures on top of the vehicles. Instead, we work with mass manufactured vehicles as is. So that makes it really scalable. These vehicles will have inbuilt sensors. They won't have large roof racks or spinning LiDARs on the top, but inbuilt sensors that makes them safe, robust, and able to be produced at tens of thousands of unit volume or even greater. So that makes this a great partnership, and that integration makes this much more cost effective than what we've seen before.
And in robo-taxis specifically, do you still plan to be asset light as a business, or is that changing?
Yeah, we do. I mean, the beauty of what we've built is it's an AI that can integrate into a wide range of vehicles. We've integrated into many different types, from vans to cars, in different markets around the world. And we see this platform growing. So we see our embodied AI platform as something that can give fleets and automakers the ability to build a range of autonomous products. We've talked a lot about the opportunity in ADAS with level 2 and level 3 driving, and now with robotaxi. But this will enable fleets and manufacturers to build these products across the whole range of autonomy. And then specifically for robotaxi, we work with automakers that produce the vehicles. We license the AI that allows them to drive autonomously, and then work with Uber as a marketplace to be able to bring this mobility solution to cities around the world.
And you talked about the assisted driving and then the robotaxis, because they're two slightly separate things. The near-term revenue stream, it seems, for assisted driving is closer, but maybe the robotaxi revenue stream is larger but further off in terms of monetizing. So, I mean, how do you think about those two pieces of the business model?
So I think that's a fair characterization, but the critical thing is it's the same AI model, our same foundation model that powers both. So we train this very large-scale, very rich and diverse foundation model that learns to understand the physical world in a general sense. So it's trained on very diverse data, from internet scale, text and video, to our own fleet data, synthetic data that we produce through our AI model Gaia, as well as our partners' data from OEMs and fleets around the world. So it learns this really general purpose understanding, and that's what enabled us to drive in over 90 cities in the last 90 days. And this model can be compressed to put into a driver assistance application, or of course for a robotaxi. And so it's that same model that we're building, that the whole weight of the company is behind, that enables the spread of these applications.
Who's going to own the fleets, and is there a requirement they have to be electric vehicles?
So we can work with any kinds of vehicles, although I hope that this technology can accelerate the electrification, because typically electric vehicles have more advanced software-defined vehicle capabilities, and in general, I do think is the future. But the technology, any propulsion system on the vehicle, it can work with. And we won't own and operate. Of course, we have a small development fleet to help our R&D, but we won't own and operate these vehicles at scale. We work with partners like Uber and to be able to operate these vehicles en masse.
And you have a partnership with Nissan over in Japan. Are you working with them also on fully autonomous vehicles, Nissan?
Our ambition is to work with Nissan across the range of autonomy, and I think we'll see this from the global automakers we work with, that, of course, their vehicles today, a hands-off level 2 driving system that allows you to drive point to point with your hands off the wheel to provide increased safety and comfort. That's a very, very natural product offering that we can offer now. But I mean, no automaker is going to stop there, and we want to grow with our partners all the way up to level 5 autonomy.
And you want to be open to different OEMs across the auto space. You're not going to be locking in exclusive agreements or deals with specific OEMs, with specific automakers. Are you going to be open to all different players, or if a major automaker came to you and said, "We want an exclusive deal," would you be open to that?
That's right. We're building a platform, and today we're working with major automakers across Europe, Japan, the United States, and we're really excited about that. For me personally, building this technology for the last 8 years, for the first 6, I couldn't even get a conversation with automakers. And in the last 2 years, we've had basically the CEO of every major automaker for a drive in our car, and it's such an honor to have them step out of the car at the end and say, "Wow, I want this in my product yesterday." So we are working as fast as we can to make sure that this can go across a range of automakers' products, and in particular ensure that this AI remains really strong at being able to generalize, being able to give automakers the flexibility in the specific compute and sensors they want to bring on board, the driver experience, the behaviors, and that way it can be a platform that can enable the benefits of autonomy across the industry.
And Elon Musk is launching trials of his robotaxi in the weeks ahead. That's the plan, at the end of June. Is Musk now playing catch-up when it comes to autonomous vehicles?
Well, today it's really ourselves and Tesla that are pursuing this end-to-end AI approach for autonomous driving, and I share their view that this is for sure the future for how this technology is going to work, and we differ from the other autonomous companies in that way. But we hold some differences in belief with Tesla. We think that redundant sensing with camera and LiDAR can be done in an effective and scalable manner and provide superhuman capabilities and a safer experience experience in the short term. And then secondly, a platform approach that we want to enable many automakers to succeed rather than vertically integrating ourselves. But I think it's really exciting to see more and more of this technology happening, and just demonstrates how fast this AI is growing. I mean, some things to look out for those trials is of course, in the industry, we think about how intelligent can the vehicle itself be, and how much does it depend on remote assistance, or how much can the actual vehicle be able to respond and actually deal with the complexities of environments. And you can look out for things like chase cars. Is there a car behind the vehicle that's monitoring the car? But ultimately, these things are natural to go through as you launch a new service. You want to monitor, you want to be safe. Typically, you'd start trialing these things with safety drivers. But ultimately, it's really for all of us a matter of when, not if, we're able to launch a driverless and viable service.
And we look to that launch of robotaxis, at least the trial of robotaxis, in possibly the early part of 2026. Alex Kendall, thank you very much indeed on the partnership with Uber, the co-founder and CEO of Wayve. There's plenty more coming up. This is Bloomberg.
The reckoning is coming is that we have to somehow figure out how we're going to deal with $37 trillion. I mean, we're actually going to hit the 37 trillion number for real. It's still 36.95 trillion, but it's going up quickly. So yeah, there's going to have to be some pretty creative thinking.
DoubleLine Capital CEO Jeffrey Gundlach speaking exclusively to Bloomberg on the concerns about the debt pile, of course, and the deficit as we look at that tax and spend bill working its way through the Senate. Let's check in and give you a gauge in terms of where the buildup of debt is happening in the US. We have a 30-year auction later today that will be scrutinized, of course, by these markets in terms of how much is absorbed. US Treasury market now heading for 30 trillion US dollars. And of course, that could go higher from here if that bill crosses the line. Don't miss the launch of Bloomberg Tech Europe tomorrow. That's at 6:30 a.m. London time. That is it from the Founders Forum. For now, the opening trade is up next. A lot more from here in Oxfordshire. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg.